again for bringing a responsible bill to this House. Thank you.
I understand the next call is a split call between Labor and the Greens, and we'll have Dr. Regine Brizard. I'll ring a bell at 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am surprised how members opposite have not really defended the bill at all. You know, they've simply made statements and assumed that, and the member says we don't need to. The minister says we don't need to. Perhaps the minister does owe this to New Zealanders so that they can understand what your thinking is. Because that member simply read a few statements, hardly realising, and what he was saying, and does acknowledge, that minister does acknowledge he knows nothing about this, and if he did give a recent speech, if he did make the points, that I might have listened to him. He carries on from the benches there, Mr. Speaker, but he has nothing to say to defend the bill, and none of his members have. And I think Moana Meki was right, Mr. Speaker. The government has forgotten. They've forgotten why we are doing this, why this whole system is being designed, why the international community is worried about this, and they have forgotten the environment. And Moana Meki was absolutely right. And of course there was no comments from the other side about those things. It's almost as if they're saying, well, we're in government, we're saying it, therefore it must be right. Well, I hope in Select Committee they do get challenged by submitters for some of what is coming up. You know, they say nothing, Mr. Speaker, to defend the clean, green image that we'd have. The members of it want to trade on it, but there's no defence of this. And in fact, the scheme that we currently have actually is about keeping New Zealand clean and green. So they are undermining the brand. The last member who spoke from Todd McClay was saying, questioning some of the figures given from my Green colleague. But what Mr. McClay needs to acknowledge, that New Zealand is one of the worst polluters per capita, on a per capita basis in the world. That's what Mr. McClay needs to acknowledge. John Banks also. I think, Mr. Banks, you are now irrelevant to this Parliament. And your speech, Mr. Banks, demonstrates that, because he criticised list members simply because they were list members. Honourable John Banks' comments were that because they were not elected. Well, I wonder, I do remember that member losing several elections. Auckland rejected him, and Epsom would have rejected him as well if it wasn't for the gerrymandering of the National Party, and Mr. Banks ought to recognise that. Mr. Banks, you are irrelevant, because most speeches you give in this House and most points of order you take, Mr. Banks, just don't make sense. If you weren't here, Mr. Banks, nobody would miss you. And Winston Peters is absolutely right. And there is a lot more I could say about that member, his performance and his history. But, Mr. Speaker, he is history. If changes are made to the electoral system, that member is history, and I don't expect to see him back in the House. And we won't have to put up with that kind of rubbish that he puts forward as if he is now some kind of God. Some members at times over, Mr. Banks, go back, enjoy life, stay in Auckland, because Epsom won't want you again, that's for sure. Now, of course, there is... If members opposite want to know anything about whether climate change is a problem, go and talk to just one or two people from the Maldives, and I have. Go and talk to one or two people from Kiribati, and I have. Now, I don't... Mr. Bridges, you don't have to go to Maldives to speak to a person from the Maldives. Go back to Tauranga and you might learn something, Mr. Bridges, because we can talk in other places that we meet. Many have come to this Parliament as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the other thing is that the two other points I want to make, Mr. Speaker. One is this. The biggest polluters are being exempted. Now, where is the sense in that, Mr. McLean? Our farmers, the agricultural sector produces 50% and they are now being excluded. Why? That doesn't make any economic sense. No, it's no logic in that as well. And the other point is this, Mr. Speaker. Why is this government so scared on leading the world on anything? They want to follow. They don't want to lead. Well, New Zealand is a proud country. There are times that New Zealand is led. I wonder what that side would have done in the 1930s to Social Security. If they were government in the 1930s, would they have that? No. This is a terrible bill, Mr. Speaker, and we will not be supporting it.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. 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 I called you.